hi. Now we will host Bogdan Gogulan, the CEO of NewSpace Capital, an LPA full member who was recently interviewed during our 10 years, 10 minutes interview series. And we are very happy to pursue the discussion with him today. The title of his presentation will be Space Private Equity with No Frontiers. Bogdan, the mic is yours.
Stefan, hi. Thank you so much for having us. So it's great to be with LPA again. So in the next 10 minutes, I will address why space industry is ready for private equity investment, and also why private equity investors start embracing the space industry and will continue doing so increasingly in the next 10 years, especially in the light of some of the macro trends that have been discussed throughout the day today. And on the slide that you will see in a second, you will see the logo which our team lives by. And if we can go to the previous slide, yes. Investing in space shouldn't be rocket science. And before going into the future of the industry, let me just quickly recap its past and the present. And in the past, the space industry has been extremely dependent on the government funding and demands from the government. It was very heavily dependent on capital expenditure. It was heavily regulated, and the technology hasn't been proved or was being in the process of development. And that was from the mid of the previous century until the brink of the century, of the current century. So what's important to understand right now, and some investors are still thinking that if we are speaking about the space industry, that all those things are still holding true. And it actually not, it really changed. Firstly, the access to space became much easier and much cheaper. So it's also now much faster to get to space thanks to the proliferation of the launch providers. Secondly, the technology, space technology, has really been improved, and also the cost of it dramatically dropped. If previously to build a satellite, you needed to spend 250,000 million, and you had to go to this geostationary orbit, now you can build a commercially 100% viable satellite for just a few hundreds of thousands, and instead of going to the geostationary orbit some 60,000 kilometers away, you can launch that to the lower Earth orbit some 200 to 600 kilometers away. Then also what's very important is that now the regulatory environment has dramatically changed, and of course Luxembourg was at the forefront of that trend with its space law enabling commercial activity in space. And then, of course, what's very important is the structure of demand has significantly changed. And now governments are playing not only reduced role in the market, but really a minority role. And the majority of demand is driven by the commercial applications from the traditional industries and established companies. And if we take a look at the slide right now, we will just see some examples of those applications that are driving the industry right now. Really, the space applications are now the integral part of the global economy. If we are thinking about the logistics, communication, internet services, and if we're thinking about entertainment, agriculture, and other traditional industries, they're more and more dependent on space. And that's really the significant structural change in the economy and in the demand for space-based applications that changes the industry. And now if we're thinking about the next 10 years and about what's happening right now, the trends that are shaping up now that will affect the industry over the 10 years time, it's important to understand that space is actually at the core of many technical trends that are happening in the market right now, being IoT, robotics, 3D printing, applications of the UAVs, emergence of autonomous driving, then highly efficient distributed networks. And space is really at the core of those technologies, either enabling them or really being the focal point for the development of these technologies. And if we take a look at the slide right now, There's just a quick recap of some of those technologies. But also you can see that the development of those technologies over the next decade is predicted to expand the space market from 300 billion euros that it is right now to over 1 trillion, being specific, 1.4 trillion over the next decade. To give you the perspective, that would make the space industry about the same size as the travel industry at the moment. And so now what's important for us to understand is that it's basically not an emerging industry anymore. It is an established industry with very significant segment of the market that consists of the growth stage companies that have diversified revenue base and stable cash flows that are catering to that industry as well as other industries. And therefore, space industry is not anymore about technical or technological risk. And the next 10 years is going to be about applications. And that's also driven by the fact that space is now becoming a backbone of further digitalization of the industry. And we've been talking about digitalization today. And as we've seen now with COVID, and the speakers on the previous panel discussed that we really woke up to the fact that connectivity, distributed teams working remotely is becoming a bigger part of our role, and actually in some cases can be more convenient and definitely more cost effective. So definitely to increase the connectivity, digitalization of the economy, we will be relying on space and space-based applications simply due to the fact that now it's cheaper and faster to do things from space than to do it terrestrially. Either if we're speaking about the 5G network rollout, or if we're speaking about Earth observation, or if we're speaking about the connectivity in the remote areas, it will require the applications from space-based assets. And that trend is most likely will accelerate the investment in space that have been growing significantly. And we can see on this slide right now the graph that represents the accelerated growth in the last 10, 20 years. And if last year people looking at that graph were talking about the potential asset bubble in the space market, now I think people understand that one, it's actually just the beginning of the trend, and two, that it is not driven by speculation, driven by underlying economics. Few reasons. First one is that, as I mentioned to you, on the demand side, there is a structural change in the economy. So there is a long-term trend of the increased demand. Secondly, the space market in comparison to space industry, in comparison to other industries, is still significantly underinvested. Third thing is that more so the parts of the this industry are even more underinvested. Even with the emergence and acceleration of investment in space industry that we've seen on the slide, 2/3 of that money went to the US, and 2/3 of that went to early stage companies, and another 2/3 of that went to the launch segment of the market, which is just 2 to 6% of the overall industry, depending on the year. So that leaves the companies outside of the US, outside of the launch industry, and specifically in the supply chain part of the market, significantly underinvested. And previous speakers have been talking about the unprecedented level of the IPO valuations. Also, we've been talking throughout the day about the fiscal and credit measures have been taken in the market to help us with the current market situation. So the extraordinary liquidity in the market right now, and even with that extraordinary liquidity, there is parts of the space ecosystem that are underinvested and therefore undervalued, while other parts of the markets, and certainly in comparison with the public markets, it's certainly some parts of the public markets are significantly overvalued. If we look at the next slide for a second, you will see the next 10 years of that investment, where it is likely to go to. And when people are thinking about space, they often think about Mars, Moon, and asteroids. And what's important to understand that the next 10 years is really about Earth and Earth orbit. The $300 billion economy growing to 1.4 trillion. This $300 billion economy, euro economy right now is enabling over 5 trillion euros of economic activity in the traditional industries. And that's what really is going to be the focus of the next 10 years of development. If we go to the next slide, you will see that what will be the part of the first frontier, so the next 10 years of the investment around the Earth and Earth orbit. And it's really the segments of the space industry that already exist and where technology is already developed. And it's going to be about applications of those technologies. And also all of that is going to be underpinned by traditional supply chain, materials, components, subsystems, and systems. And that's our view of the next 10 years. So we think that the space industry right now is where internet was 20 years ago, or where biotech was, say, 5 and 7 years ago. So the technology is fully fledged, and now it's about applications. And as we take from the name of this session, the investment in the space industry is global and universal, both in terms of the applications and in terms of the geographical spread of the technical development. However, Europe, being a most underinvested part of the market, is probably the most interesting part of the market, certainly for the next 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Bogdan. I mean, for these insights, very interesting, and we're very happy to have you also within the association. We really appreciate innovators, visionaries who want to move and create new business models. So that's really great. And one thing is fantastic here, it is that you make us dream, but it's already a reality, and you're very realistic, because this is private equity, this is business, and that's very important also.
Absolutely, Stefan. I agree with you. Very good roundup on the last 10 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Bogdan, and see you soon.
See you.